Was that a statement that he made to the federal government, or was that just a press release?
He made that statement in a press conference, and I'm trying to find the first communication that we made to the federal ag minister as well.
The federal government said the price on carbon would be revenue neutral to the provinces, and that all monies collected from a province would be returned to that province. That's your understanding as well, I'm assuming?
Well, I think you know our position on the carbon tax, and obviously we're still in that court challenge at the Supreme Court, and confident that we're going to win that. Obviously, the carbon tax, as we've always said, is very unfair on certain sectors in this province, and it obviously has a negative impact that way. So we have never supported the carbon tax, won't support the carbon tax, and to say that we would ever agree that it's revenue neutral is really not a fair statement.
So you disagree that it was revenue neutral to the federal government?
I think regardless of whether it's revenue neutral or not isn't the question. What I'm saying is the impact it has on the ag sector and the community here. I think if you want to talk about the carbon tax and revenue neutral or whatever thoughts you have, I think those are best directed to the Minister of Environment.
Yeah, and I think we can agree that the carbon tax is a particular hardship for the agriculture sector because they can't pass it on. But so the provincial government worked with a number of heavy emitters in the province, fertilizer sector, mines, among others, refineries. Why didn't the provincial government come up with a carbon pricing plan to make sure that any carbon price paid by farmers got returned to farmers?
I think that's a question that's better asked by the Minister of Environment, and I'll leave it at that.
Isn't it your job to advocate for the farmers of this province?
first, I want to, I guess I'm a little concerned on your comments about advocating for the farmers. I pride myself on being a farmer all my life and advocating for the agriculture sector for many, many years and still and have the privilege of holding this position with that in mind. I've been a very strong advocate for the agriculture industry in this province. I think this government has been a very strong advocate for agriculture in this community, in this province, as reflected in our programs and where we feel agriculture is and the importance of it in this province. So to say that I'm not an advocate, I guess I take exception to that in the highest regard. We will continue to work with our sectors. We're always engaged, and I can tell you that virtually every sector in this province and the ag industry is very supportive of our position on the carbon tax and are very proud of what we've done in taking a stand against it, against the federal government on this issue. So I'm going to, any other concerns on the climate change piece and carbon credits, I think are best answered by the Ministry of Environment and Estimates there.
So basically, you're saying that you're betting the farm on the carbon tax case at the Supreme Court. I guess my question is, if you lose that case, at that time, will you come up with a carbon pricing plan that returns to farmers all the carbon pricing dollars that they pay?
Well, I had a very short answer for your question, and I'm just going to say this: we're not going to lose. I'm glad you think it's funny.
I just want to say I do recognize that you are a strong advocate for the farmers of this province, and that wasn't at all what I was suggesting. In the June estimates under regional services, there was a $5 million amount taken out that from what was originally put out in June or in March. Sorry, what was that $5 million for?
The $5 million that was originally that you're referring to, that was in the original estimates, was related to irrigation expansion work that we were going to undertake. Province is still allocating that money for irrigation development, some of the engineering work and pre-construction work that needs to be done for irrigation expansion in this province. The money is now profiled under the Water Security Agency's budget.
In the estimates, page 28, minister's salary, I notice, is going up by 1,000, and I gather that's a statutory increase?
Yes.
I know it's small potatoes in the grand scheme of things, but I guess it strikes me as odd that in a year when we're facing a $2.4 billion deficit, that ministers would get a 2% raise. Do you care to comment on that?
I'm going to read comment through the Board of Internal Economy, which the opposition sit on that board as well. MLAs received a 1.7% increase as of April 1st, 2020. So everybody got it.
Page 29 of the estimates, under policy, trade, and value added, there's a $438,000 increase in the salary expense for this fiscal. Does that represent pay raises to existing positions, or are there additional positions being added?
So the majority of those funds have to do with the reallocation of moving some positions from a different subvote in the ministry over to that one. And so we moved our GIS staff over to the policy branch that weren't originally there. There is some of the increase that you mentioned is in relation to the standard salary increases negotiated as part of the SGU settlements.
What subvote were those positions in before?
So those positions that I referred to, the moved, were actually in 001. When you look at that, the salaries in that subvote didn't go down because some other positions moved in there from other, there was a number of reallocation of full-time equivalent positions, and so salaries were moved around from a number of different subvotes. So if you look at the subvote salary sections, you'll see that the salaries in regional services subvote and the program subvote has gone down. But there was a number of moves throughout the ministry, and that's where it all netted out.
So was it just shuffling around existing positions, or were there positions added or positions lost on a net basis?
So overall this year we have 331 FTEs, which is down 24.3 positions from the previous year, and that is directly related to the last year was the last year of the transition of the Saskatchewan Pastures Program.
So all those positions that were lost were related to that program?
Correct.
Is Ministry of Agriculture the responsible ministry for the Saskatchewan Farm Security Act?
Yes, we are.
So what programs does the ministry have to police and enforce people owning land who are not in compliance with the Farm Security Act requirements?
Paul Johnson again. Yeah, the farmland ownership provisions are within the Ministry of Agriculture, and they're governed by the Farmland Security Board. For land transactions, there's a statutory declaration that's part of the process that helps the staff determine that they're eligible for purchasing land in Saskatchewan. They meet the eligibility for ownership requirements. So that's the process that we use.
So you basically take buyers at their word?
So yeah, the statutory declaration is part of the transaction process when a land transaction takes place. When we have cause to believe that there's something's been falsified on the statutory declaration in terms of ownership eligibility, the Farmland Security Board does have power and resources to do further investigation to confirm ownership.
What powers does the Farmland Security Board have to do that? Perhaps I could just clarify the question. Does the board have the power to subpoena records? Does the board have the power to call witnesses? Does the board have the power to obtain records from third parties? Does the board have any budget allocated to investigation and enforcement?
Okay, we don't have the act in front of us, but the short answer is yes, that the Farmland Security Board does have the powers, as you mentioned, for subpoena, for calling witnesses, for obtaining records, for doing what they need to do to complete their investigation. And the second part of your question was on resources, and yes, there are resources allocated to the Farmland Security Board. I believe it's about 05 that provide the necessary resources for Farmland Security Board to do the proper investigations. I think it's safe to conclude that there hasn't, we have not ever run out of resources that we could allocate to that purpose for investigations.
Why did the ministry through the Farmland Security Board take the details of the identity of buyers and sellers out of the farm land sales database? I guess I know the short answer, which is privacy reasons, but that's all a matter of public record already, so there's not really much expectation of privacy when it's a public record already. So I guess I'm looking for a more nuanced answer than just privacy.
Okay. Yes, the Ministry of Agriculture did remove the names of the vendor and the seller of the farmland, as you're aware, from the comparable land sales database, in large part because of privacy concerns. It's not the Ministry of Agriculture's data. It's data that's owned by Information Services of Saskatchewan. So we took it off. We reinstated it, I'm sure you're aware, as we do a further review in coordination in conjunction with the Ministry of Justice to ensure that, that we can continue to provide the information that's valued and needed by the users.
I'm sure you've heard that there's some unrest relating to matters of racial discrimination lately. Lots of allegations surrounding police in particular. I'm sure you've heard of that, right? I'll skip right to the question. What is the ministry's plan to address systemic discrimination within the ministry?
Mr. Pedersen, I'm wondering if there's something in our estimates that you are tying that to?
Well, first of all, I have to find out if there is a plan so that I can find out where it is in the
Well,
estimates.
we are on agriculture estimates this evening, and I'm not sure the topic you have just chosen to interject into these ags has anything to do with the estimates that are before us.
So is it the chair's position that the government
I'm
shouldn't
trying,
have a plan
excuse
to
me.
address discrimination and racism in every
No,
ministry?
I'm just asking if it's tied into some specific area of estimates this evening that you're asking this question. But that's not within the estimates, the topic that you're asking.
How do I know?
Well, you know, because the estimates were there before you for you to ask questions on.
The estimates don't say anything about a plan for systemic.
And that's why I'm asking you if your question is tied into something within the estimates.
Well, that's what I'm trying to find out.
Minister, sorry.
In relation to the ministry's operations, I'll try and address it that way. We do take this very seriously, this issue. We have a diversity and inclusion committee in the ministry that has a work plan related to diversity and inclusion. It's much similar to many other ministries would have that. We also have, this last year, hired a senior Indigenous advisor to help ensure that our programs and services are fair and marketed in a way that First Nations and Indigenous people can access them. So I think we do take it very seriously. We have some processes in place to ensure that we're all getting better.
Does the ministry track how many of its employees are identify as a visible minority or some other disadvantaged group?
So yes, we do track them. They're put together by the Public Service Commission, but they are broken down by ministry. We don't have them with us tonight, and so.
Is there actually a cost that an ascertainable cost that the ministry allocates to its plan there, or is it just part of existing employees' job duties to make sure that that's in?
The work of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee is done by employees from a number of branches across the ministry. So that would be part of their job, putting the plan together. If there's costs for events or activities within the ministry, we would find those centrally. We don't have a budgeted number that would come out of our corporate services branch. Of course, there is a cost directly related to the salary and operation cost of a senior Indigenous advisor.
I know that we don't have any of the big meat packers in the province, so it's a little bit outside of the ministry's purview to do anything in terms of regulating a packer outside of the province. But to use beef, for instance, where we've got two packers nationally that control something like 80% of the market, there's long been a concern identified that those packers can basically manipulate prices and basically squeeze every last dollar that they can out of the beef sector. I guess I'm wondering, of the funds that you announced here recently, support for the livestock sector, what measures did you look at to make sure that that support was actually going to stay with beef producers and not just end up in the pockets of packers?
On the set-aside program that we've allocated, the $5 million, I am very proud to say that we structured a committee made up of the industry players. along with some crop insurance livestock specialist people as well, including, and Paul is on there as well. And I think what we really, they set the criteria out on who would qualify and how it would work out, and it's been received very well. And obviously the one component of it that I think is really nullifies your concern is that cattle owned by the packers will not qualify for the set-aside program.
So is there any mechanism to prevent packers from manipulating the price that they would pay to producers of livestock that are not packer owned?
There's a few comments I want to make here. First, and I said it on the outset with the steering committee that we structured. Now, we're very close to unveiling the rollout that program and things like that. But the other thing that has to be stated is the packers won't know where the cattle are coming from. So they'll bid on them. Obviously, the beef prices are high and the demand for it is high. So the packers will be bidding for the cattle, but they won't know where they're coming from. So it's really out of their, to say that they can manipulate. Under this program and the way it's designed by the experts within the industry that we have put on this committee, I think they've mitigated all chances of this program being manipulated at all.
I'm kind of getting the sense that you don't actually think that price manipulation by the packers is a problem. Is that fair to say?
No, what I'm saying is that the packers won't know where the cattle are coming from. They'll bid on the price, and the feedlots will fill the bids, but the packers will not know where the cattle are coming from.
Packers are, obviously, if they don't know where they're coming from, they just lower the price they're paying by $20 a head across the board. They've done exactly what they need to do. They don't need to know where the cattle are coming from to manipulate the price. They just need to agree that they're going to pay less per head and increase their margin. I think really
the demand is going to set the price. And I think the other thing is with the set-aside program, what this really helps with the cattle operations is they can now make that business decision if they're going to sell them at the 20 loss or if they're going to hold them and still qualify on the set-aside until the price, till they get what they feel is comfortable where they should be. So I think that obviously it's a good program that that's been designed and obviously to protect the livestock industry.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that the program itself is very important. You talked about the importance of our native grass a while back, at least when it came to carbon emissions and sequestration. Is there any plan to protect the small amount of native grass that we have left in the province from cultivation?
Hi, Wally Owen, Executive Director, Ministry of Agriculture, Lands Branch. Excuse me. We have a couple things to protect the prairie land that we look after. First and foremost, if it becomes saleable, we will only sell it with a Crown conservation easement that precludes any breaking or development on that property. Secondly, in our current policy, it specifically prohibits any native prairie to be broken.
Gather from your answer, you're talking about provincially owned native grass?
Correct, yes.
What about privately owned native grass?
Yeah, Paul Johnson again. Of course, the Ministry of Agriculture is the caretaker of the provincial agricultural crown lands, and we have programs in places, as Wally's mentioned. For the non-crown land, it would be managed by the Ministry of Environment, and we work in close collaboration, and we're working in close collaboration on protection of the native prairie with the Ministry of Environment.
When you say you're working close collaboration, are you saying there are discussions that are taking place to protect privately owned native grass from cultivation?
I just want to say at the start, and I've said it publicly before, and I'll say it here on record as well, that one thing this government truly believes that the best stewards of the land are the farmers and ranchers. They are by far the best stewards. And we haven't seen any signs of native prairie being broke up. We've seen land that was broke one time and ceded back to grass, and then farmers have made the decision whether to break it again. But that's not native prairie that has been ceded back for forage and then rebroke again for whatever reasons. But As I said, we haven't seen anything, and we just believe that the farmers and ranchers are the best stewards of the land, and it's proving itself leaps and bounds.
There's a, I'm not sure what you'd call him, a naturalist who's written a fair bit about native prairie in the province here and has documented quite a bit of loss of native prairie to cultivation. So when you say you're not seeing as a problem, are you actually tracking? Do you actually measure on an annual basis how many acres of native grass there are?
Yeah, some of the work Wally, my colleague, has referenced is quite dated, and we recognize that there has been some native prairie or permanent cover that has been broken. And what we do in the Ministry of Agriculture, and right now the target of permanent cover is 19.93 million acres in Saskatchewan, and that's in the Prairie Resilience Report. What we do in the Ministry of Agriculture is we have funding for beneficial management practices, BMPs, under the Farm Stewardship Program for permanent forage BMPs. And these are fairly high, 90% cost share funding for permanent native forage and 50% cost share funding for permanent tame forage, and a 50% cost share funding for native rangeland grazing. So we try and incent producers that are not necessarily on Crown land to maintain that permanent cover.
There was a number of land transfers or exchanges that happened between the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Agriculture. Could you tell me what that was about?
Part of our initiative in terms of rangeland management is to really make sure that the right portfolio of lands are with the right ministry. So over the last 1.5 to 2 years, we've looked at our portfolio, and we are just in the process or have transferred approximately 80,000 acres that really had no significant agricultural value. Most of it would have been in the northern part of the province, would have been solid bush. And in turn, Ministry of Environment, I think, transferred, I don't know the exact acreage, but they had a number of acres that were being cultivated or were being actively used for agricultural purposes. So it was the same thing. And I believe that 80,000 acres is going to be moved over into the Fish and Wildlife Development Fund.
Sorry, did you say 80 acres or?
Sorry, 80,000.
80,000, okay.
Agriculture.
Okay.
And about 1,000 or less from
So this year we're looking at a pretty massive deficit globally, 2.4 billion, and there aren't, the estimates for the ministry between March and June haven't changed much, but at some point, we're going to have to make up. We as a province are going to have to make up that deficit. So what do you expect the ministry budget will look like next year? What is most likely to get cut?
Quite frankly, I'm worried about this year's budget and making sure that I'm not going to even speculate on what's coming, what's next year.
Maybe cuts?
No cut.
With the challenges in the livestock industry during COVID, one of the problems noted by many people was just the past amount of consolidation in the packing industry. Does the government have any plans to support or get the packing plant in Moose Jaw going again?
Well, I just had to check with my colleagues to see if I could say it or not, and I can. So we're very proud to announce that won't be a beef plant. It's going to be a pork plant, and it has been bought up. And the company that has bought it is looking at and how they're going to remodel that and restructure it. But it will be a pork plant.
So I guess that means it won't be a beef plant then. Okay. Any plans to support any initiatives for a beef plant in Saskatchewan?
I think that's a question that has quite a few moving pieces to it, and obviously, before there's that type of interest in a facility, you've got to build your beef herd up, and that's obviously a primary focus for us is building the cattle industry up. I really believe in, and I'm very proud of the fact that what this government has done is put the incentives in place for value-added processing and opportunities for the private sector to come in and look. And I think the business model has to show that it makes sense to invest in a beef packing plant in the province. And sure, we welcome all those opportunities. And as I said, I think we've got the right incentives in place and on the processing, but primary focus right now is building that that livestock industry here in the province as the cow-calf.
What programs does the ministry have to help farmers increase their margin so that in a marketplace that's dominated by international oligopolies, that farmers can actually keep more from what they produce?
Thank you. And the reason I wanted to consult with my team is really there's a lot of things I think that we're doing right that really can add to your question about how we, get a higher value back to the farm gate and to the primary producer, whether it's crops or whether it's livestock. And I think it's all important and it's relevant. Obviously, one of the things we have done is increase in research, which has obviously had some significant improvements on crops and that side of it. But one thing we're very proud of that we brought here, and I've had the privilege of being there, was the Livestock Forage Center of Excellence that is outside of Saskatoon, and talking to the doctors there that came to this province from other jurisdictions around the world, because there isn't another one like it around the world that looks at all from the cow-calf to finishing and all aspects of it, forage and everything. So I think it's important to know that what we have done to attract this type of intelligence to come to this province and do that type of research. It's the same thing on the crop side. We're attracting scientists from around and plant specialists from around the world because of the opportunity for research that we're doing at the U of S and the Crop Development Center. So I think we've done a great job on the value-added programs that gives opportunity for individuals to start their own business and do things. We have a family friend that started her own mustard industry, and I mean, it's amazing what she has done in processing Saskatchewan grown mustard and selling it not only in this province but across Canada. So I think I think we've done everything right. I think we've got a very efficient regulatory environment. I think it's important for us to say that. And I look at the livestock side, and with premise ID and things like that, it gives opportunities for the livestock producer to access some funds that we can do if they're in the program, and obviously with buying equipment that for ease of handling of animals and things like that. I think it's important for the public to know that. And obviously we've heard it through this COVID-19, the whole issue about food and where it comes from and how and where it's grown and how it's grown. And that's one thing we've taken a leadership role in, is public trust. And I think it's important to recognize that too. And I think we recognize that through our business risk management programs and what we have done. I look and had the privilege of going to schools here in Regina for Ag in the Classroom. I've had the pleasure of speaking at 4-H and seeing what the youth are doing there. The opportunity for this side of it on what you're asking on how we can return a higher dollar to the farm gate or to the individuals. I think the programs we're doing in place and listening to the stakeholders and listening to the industry, we've accomplished an awful lot. Thank you.
So nothing to address the lack of competition between the big international corporations that dominate agriculture? I think from a livestock perspective, your comments, I think, deserve a response in my mind to this. I mean, obviously there's more than just the two packing plants beef packing plants in Alberta. There's more than that. There's others. Yeah, they are the bulk of it.
but we've also shipped cattle to Ontario. There's a significant amount of cattle that have gone to Ontario through the last few months, and also a big market into the United States, which is obviously shows the importance of trade agreements. And I think the opportunities that way are good. And I think the Western Canadian Agribition is a good example of that. When you see over 80 countries coming here to do business, to look at the genetics we're doing here, our ranchers and farmers are doing everything right that the rest of the world wants.
Time is up.
Oh, well,
If we're done with time, then we'll be moving on to the next part. So, okay. So seeing that there's no further questions, at this point in time, the committee adjourns consideration of the estimates and supplementary estimates for the Ministry of Agriculture. And Minister, I believe you have officials to switch out. Okay, so we'll just take about a 3 to 5 minute break here just for cleaning purposes, and then we can move on into consideration of Bill 197. Or 79, sorry. Just be sure Recess here. We will now move into consideration of Bill 179, the Apiaries Amendment Act 2019. And Minister Merritt, if you wouldn't mind beginning with your officials and reminding anyone that comes in from out of the room or has to speak at the mic to state their name and their position before speaking. And begin with an opening remarks as well.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I really don't have any opening comments. I think I just want to introduce the officials in the room. Once again, I have Amanda Plummer, my Chief of Staff. Rick Burton is with me, also the Deputy Minister. Penny McCall is the Assistant Deputy Minister for Regulatory and Innovation. And Jeff Wilson is here as the Provincial Apiculture Specialist, Crops and Irrigation Branch. So Jeff is the bee-whiz. And I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
We'll open the floor for questions from members and recognize Mr. Pedersen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So perhaps you could start with just describing what consultations the ministry did with stakeholders in coming up with the amendments.
Okay, so we consulted with the Saskatchewan Beekeepers Development Commission through board meetings on basically a monthly basis from 2018 through to early 2019 to discuss the actual changes. We also discussed with the general members at the AGM in 2018 at their December conference. That was done at a bear pit, and they were all members were encouraged to discuss and encouraged to give comments, and after that meeting they were encouraged to write any further concerns. We also did a repeat in the June 2019 field day, and that was in Shellbrook, and the local bee clubs, Regina and District Bee Clubs and Saskatoon Bee Clubs, were not directly consulted. However, they send official people to these meetings as representatives, so their voices were heard through there. We also discussed the small portion on the making apiculture, American foul brood a reportable disease with the SVMA president. And I forget off the top of my head at the time frame that discussion.
Sorry, and could you say what that actually
Saskatchewan Veterinary Medical Association.
Thank you. I see that the act and the bill doesn't change this, deals primarily with the western honeybee that are an introduced species kept for agriculture. Did the ministry consider expanding the scope of the legislation to manage or protect native bee species in the province?
No, we did not at this time.
This might be beyond the purview of the ministry, I'm not exactly sure, but there have been a lot of concerns raised over the, I would say particularly the past decade with how agricultural chemicals are impacting bee populations. Did the ministry consider introducing any management or regulation of how agricultural chemicals are used to protect apiaries and bee populations.
The Pest Management Regulatory Agency is the one that regulates the registration of the chemicals for use in agriculture. We don't currently have any real role in that registry.
Does the ministry consult with the PMRA on the impact of agricultural chemicals and bee populations?
Hello, I'm Penny McCall, and I'm Assistant Deputy Minister for Regulatory and Innovation for the Ministry of Agriculture. And to answer that question, yes, we are involved with studies in Saskatchewan on different products that the PMRA does register. And we have communicated any of those results to the PMRA, and they are, as do the other provinces, and they do take those results into consideration when they're making their decisions regarding what to register.
So just so I understand it, are those are provincially funded studies that are being done? Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, correct. Our partners include the Water Security Agency, as well as some of the main crop associations, including canola, wheat, and pulses.
And are all of those studies concluded, or are there ongoing research projects?
They are ongoing. We do plan to continue studies in 2020 as well.
And are those studies specifically looking at impacts on bees?
It includes water studies primarily, indirectly on bees.
Sorry, directly or indirectly?
Indirectly on bees.
Okay. So when you say water, that makes me think of neonicotinoids, and I can spell that out later for the. Are there any research projects looking at say fungicides or now I forget the term, the adjuvants in chemicals? The non-active ingredients, that is?
When it comes to a registrant preparing a product, they are responsible for preparing the materials to get that product registered. And so, for example, a Bayer would do that and do the research on the adjutant. They'd be responsible for doing that work. In what we're aware of is there's none of that research on adjuvants in Saskatchewan. However, there has been some research with pesticides being conducted at the University of Regina.
Is the ministry, does the ministry consider looking at habitat loss in terms of protecting bee populations at all?
I just want to make it clear that, you know, what we're talking about here tonight in the Act, there's no provision on habitat in the current Act.
One of the things that the Act empowers is the destruction of colonies. Do you track how many destructions occur on an annual basis if there's an infected colony?
Yes, we do.
And how many have there been? Do you have the numbers in terms of how many there's been in the last few years?
Not on the top of my head, but there were 5 yesterday.
And do you track, or have there been any offenses or charges laid under the Act? I know there's a provision for charging someone with offenses. Has that ever taken place?
No, we have never charged anybody under the Act.
Just out of curiosity, were the 5 colonies all one producer or multiple locations? Or multiple producers, I guess?
So the Act does allow me to disclose where the diseases are. However, it's only for bee health purposes, so I'm not sure I can disclose at this time.
Well, Minister, I think your officials have done a sweet job, and I don't want to drone on. So it appears that the work that the ministry has done here lays a solid foundation for beekeeping industry in the province. And I think with that, I don't have any more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Seeing that there are no more questions from members this evening, we'll move on to the bill. Clause 1, short title, is that agreed? Yes. Carried. Clause 2, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 4, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 5, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 6, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 7, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 8, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 9, coming into force, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts as follows the Apiaries Amendment Act 2019. I would now ask a member to move that we report Bill number 179, the Apiaries Amendment Act 2019, without amendment. Mr. Weeks so moves. Is that agreed? Carried. Minister, if you would like to conclude this evening with any closing remarks you might have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank the committee for our indulgence tonight through estimates, but I also want to take the opportunity to thank my officials and the work that Rick and his team do for the ministry on behalf of agriculture in the province of Saskatchewan. Must be noted on record that they are a dedicated team to the agriculture industry here in the province. In regards to the Apiaries Act, I want to thank the member opposite for the questions, but I also want to thank Jeff and the team for really on the consultation process. I did meet with the beekeepers prior to this, and they were very happy that we made these changes and were very supportive of changes to the Act. So with that, Madam Chair, I will close, but once again, I just want to be on record for thanking my team at the ministry for the work they do and their dedication to agriculture here in the province of Saskatchewan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Mr. Peterson, if you have any remarks you'd like to make at this point in time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to just thank the minister for the work that he does on behalf of the industry in the province. I know that one of the things I've heard over and over again from stakeholders in the province is just how good they think the lines of communication are between the ministry and the industry, and that's I think it's important to recognize that the work that you do and that your officials do. I don't think there's any there's no doubt that that there is a very dedicated team in the ministry, and it's a close-knit sector within the province that really works together for the betterment of the province. So, just want to thank everybody for their work here tonight, and appreciate the time.
Thank you. That concludes our business here this evening. I'm going to ask a member to move a motion of adjournment. Mr. Buckingham has moved that we adjourn. All agreed? Agreed. Carried. This committee now stands adjourned until Thursday, June 18th at 6:00 p.m.
Thank you, Madam Chair.